Good afternoon, Prime Minister Trudeau. I would first like to thank you for retaining our law firm and taking active steps to reconcile relations between the Indigenous nations and Canada. I personally appreciate you taking the time to listen to our Wampum Belt design proposal. I would like to recognize that I am currently located on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and thank these nations for their care and stewardship over the land. I would also like to recognize Ottawa, where you are currently located, sits on the traditional homeland of the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. We recognize their land and care as well. These are the first individuals to call this territory their home, and we recognize that we are only occupying their land. Our firm has been doing extensive research in the relationships between Canada and the Indigenous nations on Turtle Island. We hope to respect and honor both nations through this Wampum Belt. A wampum belt has been used for hundreds of years in Indigenous culture to signify a promise. It has been used to strengthen relationships, solemnize treaties, vouch for the integrity of a speaker, and establish peace in times of dispute. Wampum belts have been used by Indigenous nations to create agreements with other nations, which we hope this wampum belt will symbolize as well. In the past, wampum belts have been exchanged in Canada with Indigenous nations when signifying treaty agreements. However, these treaty agreements have not been upheld in legal settings in the Canadian justice system. We urge you to embrace this wampum belt as the beginning of a new relationship with Indigenous peoples. We strongly recommend that this agreement and promise is upheld in legal settings, in land title claims, and it is seen as a legal relationship. This will show Canadians that you mean to promote equality between the nations that reside on Turtle Island. We hope it will promote a healthy relationship for all parties moving forward. The wampum belt our firm has designed is made with purple and white beads. In Indigenous culture, purple represents a tumultuous time between nations. This is currently the state of relations in Canada. The white beads symbolize peace and purity. This is the type of relationship we aspire to achieve. The belt is 13 beads high, representing the 13 territories and provinces in Canada. The wampum belt is 44 beads long, representing the importance of the number 4 in Indigenous cultures. In Indigenous culture, the number 4 represents many building blocks of life. As Mother Earth has 4 seasons, there are 4 colors of man, 4 directions, and many more. We honor Indigenous culture and Mother Earth by using the number 4 in our wampum belt. The wampum belt has 2 white parallel lines running the length of the belt. This is to pay homage to the original Friendship Treaty belt given in 1613 to the Dutch. The 2 parallel lines represent different cultures, laws, and customs that can coexist without impeding each other. They do not intersect or outpace each other. They shall remain parallel, equal, and separate within the same wampum belt. This is the relationship that Indigenous nations aspire to have with Canada on this land. There are 2 white circles in the center of our wampum belt. The larger white circle represents Mother Earth. She is the one that gives us food, seasons, water, and the air we breathe. The smaller circle represents humans on the earth. We use the smaller circle inside the larger circle to express that we need to remain smaller and make less of an impact on the earth. The impact of the human race on the earth needs to promote longevity. One of the customs that Canada would be wise to adopt from Indigenous culture is to make every decision while taking into account how it will impact the next 7 generations of children following. This smaller circle represents that we need to remember that we are secondary to the earth, and we need to take care of the only earth we have. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada published an executive report providing the Government of Canada with 94 calls to action. These calls to action were made to assist the Canadian government with addressing systemic negligence of the Indigenous peoples in Canada. These calls to action were made with the request that every level of government can try and renew their relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. Prime Minister, we hope that with this Wampum Belt, this is what you are trying to do. Our firm highly recommends that to renew the spirit of nationhood and reconciliation, you look to these calls of action. They will be the truest, most honest requests by the Indigenous peoples for equality in this country. With this Wampum Belt, we request that the promises do not go without actions. Actions to find the missing Indigenous women and children, actions to provide Indigenous peoples with clean drinking water, and actions to promote longevity on this earth. To accept this Wampum Belt or make promises without actions would only establish that Indigenous traditions and legal orders are secondary to Canada's and perpetuate the violence and discrimination these nations face daily. Our law firm has researched and found that wampum belts and treaties made without being supported in the legal sphere are very damaging. Land that has been promised to Indigenous people have been taken, Indigenous customs are not recognized in the courts, and Indigenous lives have been taken throughout the time of the residential schools and lost. We urge you once again to not take this Wampum Belt lightly. We urge you to receive this Wampum Belt as you would an enshrined contract with a neighboring country, for the meaning is the same. Take it with an awareness that the two nations share this land, that two nations need to support each other, and the two nations need to be treated as equals. Only then will these two nations find real agreement and possibly reconciliation. Indigenous nations have every right to be wary of any agreement or promise made by the Canadian government, and we hope you do not make the same mistake as previous politicians have done. In summation, our Wampum Belt and legal advice to you is very simple, Prime Minister. To promote real reconciliation between these nations in disarray, please make promises you intend to follow through with. Establish Indigenous legal orders and traditions, not as secondary to Canadians, but as the original traditions of this land and equally as important. We urge you to listen to your Indigenous communities and uphold this Wampum Belt promise and all future promises in the Canadian legal system. Thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.